Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Wednesday, December 10th. We have got an exciting show lined up for you today. First up, we have an exciting conversation for you with Bill Ready, the CEO of Pinterest. We're going to get into what he thinks about chatbots potentially becoming the new battlefield for advertising. And we're also going to talk about the open and closed source AI debate. We're then talking to our Asia Bureau Chief about the Information's reporting around emergency meetings that have been happening in China around the H200 chips. And we'll also talk about a story the Information published about the latest on DeepSeek. Next up, we are breaking down a story on MGX, a fund based in the United Arab Emirates that has become a major financier for big data center projects. And finally, we will end the show with a discussion around AWS's new AI model with the company's director of technology. It is a big show, so let's get right on into things. Pinterest is one of many social media companies that is carefully navigating the AI transition. The company's revenue growth has steadily accelerated over the years, but of course, many are asking about the ways in which AI chatbots could change the battleground for advertising altogether. I want to bring on the CEO of Pinterest, Bill Ready, for an exclusive conversation on how he is thinking about all of these issues. Bill, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Akash.
So there's a lot of different points I want to get to, but I want to start with this blog post that you put out recently, and it talked about your affinity for open source models. And I was struck by this line. You wrote, you wrote that you're using open source AI models at Pinterest to achieve similar performance at less than 10% of the cost of leading proprietary AI models. Look, we know how competitive these models are. That's a big claim. What did you mean by that? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think this is, so much of the discussion around AI has been about who's building the latest, largest proprietary model. And I think there's a couple other really important trends that are happening that aren't being talked about enough. The one is open source. And as we published, we're seeing that we can take open source models and fine tune those and get similar performance to the very best proprietary models at less than 10% of the cost. And I think that's really, really important because open source has a democratizing effect that has been true for the building of software for decades now. And I think that's really important for how we look forward as to how many companies can build with AI. If you can get similar capabilities for less than 10% of the cost, that's going to have a really democratizing effect, really spur a lot of innovation and creativity. And so we're pushing our work on that to share with others just how good that is, because we think it's really important there's a thriving open source community for AI. And then the second trend around compact fit for purpose models that I think also is about you don't need the very largest models in the world to do every single task. And that's also a way that you can create cost effectiveness in AI as well.
So I just want to make sure that I understand this. I mean, somebody might hear this and think, less than 10% of the cost of leading AI models. I mean, we think about Google and OpenAI as the leaders with their proprietary models. So help me understand, are you saying that the models that Pinterest has built using open source technology is just as good and cheaper? Is that what you're saying?
Two things. One, there are large-scale open source models available now that you can take and fine-tune them for your purpose. And what we found for our purposes is that we could achieve 90% lower cost at similar performance on the things that we needed to do.
Okay, and so for a very specific use case.
Well, yes, but I think this is a generalizable point because that's about the large generalized models. There's a second point, which is related to this, that we are also building our own in-house models for specific tasks. And so these are two different tactics that can help companies get a lot more out of AI at much lower cost. And this is really important right now because nearly every CEO that I talk to, for example, I was, last week I was at the New York Times Deal Book. And so many of the CEOs that I talked to there said, well, they've invested a lot of money in AI and buying these off-the-shelf proprietary software solutions, but they're not seeing the return on investment that they need. They're spending a lot, but they're not yet getting the savings that they had expected, or the spend is significantly offsetting the savings that they were getting. And companies finding that they can leverage open source to get much better efficiency. This has been true in software development for decades. In fact, many of the largest companies out there wouldn't exist if not for the fact that they had been able to build on open source that
Hmm.
was much cheaper than proprietary databases or proprietary operating systems. Things like Linux and those types of things were really, really important to the building of a lot of these trillion-dollar market cap companies. Well, the next batch of companies, they're going to need to have really great open source AI available to them to have these cost efficiencies. Otherwise, the proprietary software may collect all the value
Hmm.
without others being able to go build and create value from that as well. So we think this is really important, again, which is why we're sharing our findings.
So you're a big proponent of open source. What do you think
Absolutely.
of the open source models coming out of China? I mean, that's in the news this week. Tons of progress there earlier in the year. We've sort of heard less about them, but we know that look, it's just one model away from roiling markets as we've seen. Are you sort of how close are you watching that space?
Yeah, I mean, the DeepSeek moment was a huge moment. And I think so much of the DeepSeek moment, the conversation was about how they had done that on less than the latest GPU chips. And the sort of theory of constraints of how they leveraged those constraints to find cheaper ways to build those models. And that was really about the chips. But there were a lot of techniques they used that are now going into the open source community that others can use to build their own models. So we're using some of those techniques for our own models that we're building internally. But then you've had other really good open source models emerge, like Quinn, for example, that is putting out really powerful models. But I think that DeepSeek moment was so much of the focus was on the chips and lower cost chips.
Hmm.
But I think the bigger moment was that you had an open source model
Hmm.
that was rivaling the large proprietary models. And now you have that with Quinn. You see others coming out, Mistral. Like, you're seeing an open source community really start to develop that can compete. Open source is at the table and it is competing and doing so at really effective cost to performance levels. And that's important, not just from a cost perspective. I think it's also important that, so many people refer to these models as, this model came from this country or this model came from that country. The really important thing about open source belongs to everyone.
Hmm.
It's not controlled by any one company. True open source is not controlled by any one company. It's not controlled by any one nation state. And if you want OpenAI to be in the hands of the many rather than the few, then open source is really important to that.
Right.
And again, that has been really important to software development for decades now. And I think it's really important that that continues in the world of AI.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be instead of proprietary models. Open source software has been huge for decades. It doesn't mean that proprietary software no longer exists. It just means that open source software is a really important component of a thriving ecosystem overall alongside of proprietary models and can compete well with those proprietary models. And it's a good check and balance on those proprietary models.
So let me ask you a question broadly about Pinterest and how you're approaching AI now. Where are you applying the gas on AI, and then where are you pushing the brakes? Because we've done some reporting at the Information, and we've spoken to it was your CTO actually who
Right.
spoke with us about ways in which the company is taking a more careful approach to, for example, AI generated content. Talk to me a little bit
Certainly.
about how you see that.
Well, we're applying the gas. We've effectively turned Pinterest into an AI-powered shopping assistant over the last few years. We've had 9 straight quarters of record high users. More than half the platform is Gen Z. Shopping is the primary reason they come to the platform. And if you ask Gen Z users why they come to Pinterest, they'll say things like, "Well, Pinterest just gets me," and that's us using our AI models tuned off our unique curation signal
Hmm.
to give really great personalized recommendations and agentic style experiences that help guide users through shopping journeys. So we're really doubling down on that. We've just launched our latest Pinterest assistant, going even further with that. But we're really building shopping we're building AI experiences that don't replace shopping or automate away shopping.
Right.
I sort of think that folks are doing that or trying to build shopping for people that hate shopping. We're building shopping assistants for people that love shopping, and that want an assistant to actually help them immerse in that journey. So that's where we're doubling down and hitting the gas. To your point, the place where I wouldn't say we're hitting the brakes, I'd say we're just making sure that we use AI responsibly. The first is tuning AI for positivity. This is one of the primary reasons I joined Pinterest from Google nearly 3.5 years ago. Is that one, I wanted to prove there was a more positive alternative to the business model of social media, that so much of it had engagement via enragement at the core.
Hmm.
Uh, and a big part of that, how does social media become negative? AI got put in charge of what you see on social media more than a decade ago. It was just earlier forms of AI. And
So
the AI was
this is like
asking,
avoiding slop, essentially.
well, avoiding slop or avoiding other negative things like, you know, you know, when AI was asked to maximize your view time on social media more than a decade ago, the AI figured out you look longer at the things that trigger you, whatever your triggers are. And so we set out to tune AI for positivity. If AI could be used to keep you glued to a screen with engagement via enragement, why can't we ask the AI to make sure you leave the platform feeling better and that it's a positive contributor to your emotional well-being? And we've been able to prove that out. So that's a
Hmm.
place
Hmm.
where we're making sure we don't, have a race to the bottom on just trying to keep people glued to a screen, doing things that are addictive
Right.
rather than additive. And so we try to focus on additive. So that's one place. Another place is on trust and safety, where we're using AI to combat bad content. So you asked about AI slop. Well, there's been a huge increase in the ability to create content, and the vast majority of that are people that are having fun creating good content. So you've had a democratization of people's ability to express themselves. And that's a good thing. But also mixed in that, like any technology, generative AI can be used for good or for bad. And
Right.
so you also have bad actors that are trying to create things that are spammy or not helpful or harmful. Well, we
So
use
so
our
do
AI
you
models to battle that.
is there AI generated content right now on Pinterest that is allowed?
Oh, absolutely. And what I would say with AI generated content, this whole discussion of AI slop, a couple things I'd say. One is that, you know, it's not about is AI content good or bad. It's about some AI content is good and some AI
Right.
content is bad. And how do you parse that? And how do you give the user control over what content they want to see?
And
And so
so you're using AI to then assess which of the content is AI generated. Am I understanding that
That's
correctly?
exactly right. So
Okay.
2 things that we're doing. The first is that we are labeling AI content so the user knows when it's AI generated, and we're using industry techniques to go detect and label when
Yeah.
something AI generated. But not everybody's labeling that. But we are further along in the industry, I think, in making sure that we label, and we've made a choice to label when we can detect that it's AI generated content. Secondly, we're giving the user choice and letting the user decide when they want to see less AI content. And so that's very different than other platforms. And I think part of why platforms may be avoiding this is that they're seeing that the AI generated content is really engaging. It keeps people looking for longer. But for us, we're not trying to keep people looking for longer. We're trying to help people do things that make a positive impact in their real life, even when that
Right.
means doing something off their platform, like going and buying a new outfit or going and redesigning a room or things like that. And so we consistently give our users agency, both
And
in
the
what they see
option.
on the platform, and then they have the option of when the AI generated content is helpful or not. And we're personalizing more and more
Right.
to understand for each user what's helpful and not. And some of these things, to give you some examples of when is it helpful versus when is it not. There's some content that's just inherently bad, that would be created by bots or that is spam content or things like that. That we use AI models to just get that stuff off the platform. But there's
Right.
other content, we've always said, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, or one person's trash can be another person's treasure. Something that one person thinks is art, go back to sort of, modern art movements and things like that. Well, traditionalists would have said like, oh, well,
Right.
that's
I
art.
mean, this is
Well,
the thing is that it's everyone's opinion really what they want to see, and so I think that
that's right.
choice is
So
interesting.
that's right. It's a choice and it's a personalization issue. So it's really about how do you get the personalization right and give the user the ability to express themselves and say what they like. But even for a given user, they'll shift modes because sometimes the user may be in a dreaming mode. We're seeing this thing that is sort of a fantasy that you'd say, well, hey, that's a really interesting sort of room layout. You could never do that in real life, but it's really cool to sort of expand my mind's eye as to what
Right.
might be possible. And so in dreaming mode, that's great. But then when they say they go to doing mode, I want to buy a sofa. but none of the stuff in that picture is real. Well, our visual search technology actually lets the user take that sofa and that AI generated content and will show them the closest real sofa that they could actually buy. And so
Hmm.
we're helping the user navigate the sort of movement between, well, when am I in sort of fantasy mode and dreaming mode, in which case some of these fantastical, AI generated images might actually be helpful, in the same way that we had fiction and nonfiction previously, or we had fantasy stories before, that weren't possible today, but it could
Right.
inspire something that, something else might be possible, and then help the user toggle over when they're ready to actually do something in the real world.
Let me ask you a little bit, so if we move on from the product to the business that you're in, which is the
Mhm.
advertising market. Look, I mean, there's been a lot of chatter about the chatbot businesses introducing ads over time.
Mhm.
Whether it happens this week or next week, I think the consensus is it's going to happen.
Mhm.
And, I want to talk to you about what that means for your business. Do you see that eating into your advertising business at all?
Well, advertisers have behaved very consistently, and that advertisers will go where consumers are, and advertisers will really go where consumers are actually making, purchasing choices. And for our business, and so wherever purchasing choices are happening, advertisers are going to go there. And clearly, AI assistants and chatbots are a place where that is happening, and where advertisers are certainly going to go, and they have the ability to, as they have the ability to do that. But it's not a zero sum game, because at the end of the day, advertisers are looking to get incremental purchasing. And for us, even as you've seen the rise of chatbots and assistants, I think over the last, 3 years, ChatGPT's put on roughly 800 million users. Well, at the same time, we've had 9 straight quarters of record high users. More than half of our platform is Gen Z. And, I would guess that probably nearly every one of those Gen Z users on our platform,
Right.
they know
But
about
it,
chatbots and they've
you
used
know,
them, but they see us as something unique and different from that. And so there's room for both of these to exist. And that actually mirrors the way search has been playing out for decades. Is that for decades you've had general purpose search, where like Google, for example, is a winner of general purpose search. But then you also had vertical specific searches that coexisted with that, where more product searches starting on Amazon than starting on Google, or travel searches starting on Booking or Expedia rather than Google. And while you did have the general purpose capability, you could have a vertical specific capability where users could go deeper, whether it be an Amazon, for shopping, or Booking or Expedia for travel. And I think similarly in this AI world, you're going to have general purpose AI,
mm,
is akin to what general purpose search was, and you'll have a small number of, large winners in that. But then also you're going to have fit for purpose tools that for a specific task, just as talking about the models, you can get fit for purpose models that perform that task better. I think you're going to have companies and products that do that better. And that's been my thesis from the beginning with Pinterest, is that for visual search and shopping, we can really focus on that and do things that outperform. And one last thing to share with you on that, on our last 2 earnings calls I've shared, our latest multimodal visual search models outperform the leading proprietary models by more than 30 full percentage points on the relevancy of their shopping recommendations. So not for anything you can ask it, not for all of human knowledge, but specifically to shopping, outperforms on the relevancy of recommendations by 30 full percentage points, because of this issue of the smaller, compact, fit for purpose models with our unique signal around user behavior and curating, we can outperform. And that's why those Gen Z users that are flocking to our platform will say things like, well, Pinterest just gets me, because we're
right.
really getting the personalization right through those shopping recommendations.
I wonder what you think is the most difficult part about building an advertising business that maybe people miss out on talking about as it relates to these chatbot businesses. Because look, I think people think that the ads are going to appear overnight and that people are going to like them and that they're not going to affect the user experience at all. I mean, the reality is you introduce this thing. We've seen it already, right? People see little pop-ups in ChatGPT and they get scared that this is an ad. Oh my gosh, what's happening? And then the head of ChatGPT has to come out on X saying, no, 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 we're not doing it yet. Don't worry. You have navigated this exact tension between how do you intelligently place ads and how do you not affect the user experience. What do you think is the toughest part about this challenge that people neglect to talk about when they talk about this transition to ads that these chatbots will go through?
Well, I think one of the things, what you're alluding to that we have done is that we focus on making sure that the ads are great content for our users. And when the user's in a shopping mode, which is, the majority of users on Pinterest are there to shop. I talked about, winning with Gen Z, more than 2/3 of Gen Z is coming to Pinterest to shop. 39% of Gen Z, an Adobe study came out and said 39% of Gen Z thinks of Pinterest as a first place to go search. 70% of them see Pinterest as more personalized. And so, those are examples of, where they see that we're providing a really good fit for purpose solution on shopping, but it also means that when somebody's shopping, as long as we show them the right product, it doesn't matter so much whether it's an ad or not an ad. Did you show them the right pair of shoes that they're actually looking for? That's what matters. And so for others, I think this will be a real question is like when you have commercial intent, the ads can be great. When the user doesn't have commercial intent, the ads may not be so great. And I think with a lot of the chatbots, there's going to be some commercial behavior in there. There's going to be a lot of behavior in there that's non-commercial.
Hmm.
But for us, our platform is primarily about shopping, and so that makes it so that we can really, really, deliver a great experience for the user. Where the user, as we've delivered those 9 straight quarters of record high users, we've also consistently deepened engagement per user, which means we're making the ads relevant content for them. They're helpful to the user, but that's also great for the advertiser because that means the advertiser gets to meet the user in a moment where the user actually wants to see their ad. And in
Right.
some other place where the user might be researching or doing other things, user may not want to see their ad in that moment. And so here we can align the incentives of the user and the advertiser because of the shopping context.
I wonder what you think about where Pinterest will be 3, 4 years from now, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is this idea that social media companies that they have had to reinvent themselves over the years in some capacity, and we see companies taking big swings. I mean, Meta went from the metaverse, and to the extent it's still focused on that, it's now focused on personal super intelligence, is the moonshot that they talk about.
Mhm.
You have Snap that has come out with their spectacles and their wearables play, and they're talking about that as the future of the business. I wonder what Pinterest's moonshot is. I mean, I don't see the company taking as big a swing, for example, going to wearables, to the extent that that is
Mhm.
a direction that any company could go. I think it's debatable whether or not that is a transition that Snap will be able to make
Yeah.
effectively. But as you think about your business, you will have to reinvent yourself in the coming years.
Mm.
And my take is it's going to have to be more than just implementing AI in the core platform.
Yeah.
What is the moonshot for you?
Well, so you're absolutely right. It's more than just implementing AI in the core platform. In fact, we've had a major reinvention of the platform over the last 3 years. So we are in the middle of that reinvention. 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, Pinterest was declining users and was sort of, focusing on short form video like everybody else and had lost differentiation and relevance. And as we focused on turning Pinterest into an AI-driven shopping assistant, that has led to the resurgence of the platform. That has been a massive reinvention of the platform. And we did that not just by, just by implementing AI. It was that there's a really unique behavior on Pinterest that we've really doubled down on in terms of human curation. And I think so much of the discussion about AI, has been, how does AI just, automate away all the things that humans will do? And, we'll all just go live on a universal basic income and have no work to do or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a very interesting life. I think most people wouldn't think that's a very interesting life. We're focused on how do we make the AI additive for people and truly helpful to people so that people can be more productive, get, a higher quality of life.
Hmm.
And, that human curation on our platform is a good example where when you get that 70% plus of Gen Z that sees Pinterest as more personalized than other places to go search. Well, part of that is because that human curation signal that we get, that is people styling outfits on our platform or designing rooms on our platform. AI by itself doesn't have style and taste. Humans have style and taste, and then the AI can learn from that. And so when humans come to our platform and they design things, put together outfits and say which handbag looks good with which dress, or which sofa would look good in a room setting, that's human taste and curation. Then we can train AI from that, not only to make better recommendation to that user, but to make better recommendations to other users. So the next
Hmm.
person comes and starts with just that handbag, but says, I really like that handbag, but I'm not sure how I'd style an outfit around that. Well, we see the intersection not only of how other people style that handbag, but other people with a taste similar to yours style that handbag. So that's what's letting us do really unique things with AI. And back to our latest multimodal visual search models outperforming by 30 full percentage points the large proprietary models.
Hmm.
It's that unique curation signal plus our compact fit for purpose models. As we think forward, we think we're just getting started in terms of what a true AI powered shopping assistant can be. Right
Right.
now, we're making great recommendations of things you'd want to buy, helping you go take action on those things. How much more helpful can that be? That is a moonshot in and of itself. In terms of like, can that get to a place where it's as good as the person you'd love going shopping with the most, whether that's a best friend, a sister, a brother, or if you're lucky enough to have a personal stylist, can it be as helpful as that? We think that in and of itself is a moonshot and doesn't require a different form factor or things
Right.
like that. And the last thing I'd say, so many moonshots, um, so many moonshots end up either not panning out or come to fruition much later. And I've built 5 startups from zero, Venmo and Braintree being the 2 most recent. And so I've been in Silicon Valley for a long time. And one of the things that two things you'll hear in Silicon Valley. One is like, well, I was right but early.
Right.
The other thing that any good VC would say in response is right but early is the same as wrong. And so, these moonshots, you've got to have a vision for where you want to go, but you've also got to be deeply tuned into like what users are ready for today and what you can deliver today. And I think we're balancing that really well, where we have a view of like, okay, shopping and human curation, are at the core of our platform. That human curation is a real differentiator for us. We think over time that can let us do tremendous things to be, as helpful as going shopping with, your best friend or the really great sales associate at the boutique or whatever. We think that's where that can go over time. What are users ready for today? Well, today, it's really great recommendations, really, seamless ability to go purchase right inside of our platform. You can link an Amazon account and purchase right inside of our platform. Those kinds of things that really make their journeys easy today.
Right.
And then we'll
Right.
with our users. And so we certainly have that long-term vision, but we're also really laser focused on what are users ready for now. And that's why we don't use words like agentic and things like that when we're talking to our users, because as
You
much
want to
as we
preserve
Silicon
the
Valley,
human experience. Right.
yeah, as much as we talk about agentic in
Right.
Silicon Valley, the average consumer isn't thinking about agentic at all. They're just thinking about, did this thing help me do what I wanted to do? And on that, I think we're getting really high marks as evidenced by users flocking to the platform and engaging deeper and deeper over the last 3 years.
Great. Well, Bill, it's great to have you on the show. I really appreciate the conversation, and there's a lot of
Thanks for having me.
exciting quarters to come, I'm sure, for the company. It's been a great run under you, and so look forward to seeing how you lead the company from here.
Oh, thank you so much, Akash. Really appreciate it.
That was Bill Reddy, the CEO of Pinterest, here on TITV. Okay. The Trump administration has given the green light on H200 sales to China, but now China is trying to figure out its stance, and the information reported China is trying to assess how much demand there is domestically for the chip. Joining me now to break it all down is Jing Yang, our Asia bureau chief. Jing, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Always glad to be back, Akash.
So, tell us about these emergency meetings that have been happening in China.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, today, Chinese government officials called a series of emergency meetings with Chinese tech giants, including Alibaba, ByteDance, and Tencent, to ask them how much of the Nvidia H200 they actually need. And the reason that they called these meetings is because that China, on one hand, wants to is keenly aware that China needs these powerful NVIDIA chips to develop the country's AI systems. But on the other hand, they also want to make China more self-reliant in semiconductors. So what Trump, has made as some sort of a peace offering, seeing as the Chinese side, also complicated somehow Beijing's policy goals.
Hmm. Now, I imagine there's a lot of demand for the H200 chip, given how much more powerful it is than the H20. Of course, we know it's not as good as the Blackwell. I wonder, though, what these meetings say about the direction in which the government is looking at AI. Is it different from the approach they took with the H20?
It's yes and no. So basically, in today's meetings, that we learned that the Chinese officials told the tech companies that they want the companies to go back and look at, give them a very detailed assessment and justify their demand for the H200. Like, for example, you have to justify why you need this many of H200
Hmm.
that, Chinese domestic chips just cannot replace. And then the companies were told that once the officials have compiled and then looked through all these responses from the companies, and they will make a decision. By the way, once the Chinese government makes the decision, it's not like going to tell the world about it. They're very likely going to use this so-called window guidance method, which is like a very common but very powerful method for Chinese regulators to privately tell companies their policy expectations instead of making it public.
Right.
That, by the way, was exactly the same approach that Chinese government used a few months ago, as we reported, to ask Chinese companies not to purchase any of the Nvidia H20 chips.
Right. Well, I want to pivot to talking about DeepSeek. The information published a story about how the company is pushing ahead with its own model development. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, I mean, since DeepSeek rose to global stardom in January, I don't think we have learned much about what actually is going on in the company, right? And that just, is such a mystery. And we spent all of this year trying to figure out what is the company's next big move. And finally, we were able to report today that it turns out that DeepSeek has been able to use Blackwell chips, by the way, which are banned from being exported to China by the US government. But somehow they got their hands on these chips from the smuggling channel. And then they needed these chips because they are racing to build their next flagship AI model so they can continue to stay competitive in the AI race in China and globally.
Hmm. Now, I wonder, connecting the two stories together, do you think that that story changes at all in the months to come in the face of the new H200 chip? Does the policies around the H200, could that change the different types of chips that DeepSeek tries to use?
Yeah, I mean, not just DeepSeek, right? All the Chinese companies that are trying to develop their own AI models to stay competitive in China and globally against US companies as well. I mean, what I'll say right now is that it will definitely have an impact on the demand. Like, let's say if the Chinese government actually allows H200 to get into the country, it will definitely have an impact on the black market demand for Blackwell chips. It's just simply too early to tell to what extent it will be impacted.
Hmm.
But it's a very fluid story. It's developing, and all these Chinese tech companies and Chinese government are assessing sort of the right combination, right? Let's say from Chinese domestic chips to H200 to the sort of contraband Blackwell chips.
Let me ask you one last question before I let you go. We've been talking on the show about this issue, and Jessica Lesson, our editor in chief, was on a couple days ago talking about how, in the long term, her prediction is that the technology is kind of going to even out. And I know she was talking about the models specifically, and I know models are a slightly different battlefield than the chips. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is, look, whether it's the US versus China, I do think that 3 years from now, I think the models are kind of going to even out. I mean, chips, I even think that the chips, the strength of them will even out. Is that your prediction as well? Do you agree with that? Or do you think that the story might go differently?
I think this is still a little early to tell, to be honest, right? China, with DeepSeek and Alibaba's Quen and some other smaller startups have demonstrated, world class capabilities in open source models. However, we know that the open source approach usually is adopted by the second runner, right? The
Hmm.
best players usually want to protect their technology, want to go proprietary, right? So the fact that China actually has not had a proprietary model that is being used by companies or developers outside of China shows that China still has a lot of catch up to do. And there may be some geopolitical hindrance again in the background, but by and large, the chip shortage can also not be ignored.
Hmm. Right.
I would say this, right? If in the next few years China can actually make the real breakthrough in chip design and chip manufacturing, then yes, then we can call that China will be on par, or even some years overtake the US. But
Hmm.
we just cannot discuss the AI race without looking at the chip element.
Right. Well, that's why it's such an important story to cover. Thank you, Jing, for coming on. We really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing the reporting coming out of your bureau in the weeks to come. That is Jing Yang, our Asia Bureau Chief here at The Information. When it comes to financing for big data centers, we tend to think about the big tech companies in North America that are spending heavily on capital expenditures. But my colleagues today published a deep dive on why MGX, a fund based in the United Arab Emirates, has become another major financier for these projects. Here to tell us more about the big role they've grown to play is Miles Krupa, our AI and finance reporter. Miles, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Akash.
So, who is MGX? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's kind of the new kid on the block. It was started about a year ago by the UAE, and it's a joint venture basically between their sovereign wealth fund called Mubadala and this AI company called G42. And so they've both put in money to this fund, and it's effectively pouring billions into data centers, chips, OpenAI, XAI. It's sort of investing all across the AI spectrum really rapidly.
And so, in terms of where this money comes from, you said it's the sovereign wealth fund is one source of the capital. G42, where does their money come from?
Yeah, well, G42 was originally set up by the UAE, but it also has outside backers. It has Silver Lake, which is a big tech-focused private equity firm here in the US. Ray Dalio, the former leader of the hedge fund Bridgewater, is also an investor. So
Right.
you see this kind of cross-pollination happening.
Okay, so they have a lot of money to deploy. You also wrote about how they've become a giant in the data center financing game. Tell us about some of the projects that MGX is backing.
Yeah, they're doing sort of two things. One, they're investing big in data center companies. So, what we revealed in this story is basically that they're going to be the largest shareholder in this company called Aligned Data Centers
Hmm.
that struck a record $40 billion deal this year to be sold to a consortium that includes MGX, among other investors. So they're investing in companies like Aligned, Vantage Data Centers is another one. And then they're going to places like France and Italy and doing joint ventures with local companies to build data centers there, really huge ones of a gigawatt or more. So they're doing a few different things, but suffice to say, they're trying to build a really huge data center portfolio that's also global, not just in the UAE.
And so, one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is the U.S. government has been so sensitive right now to keeping AI domestic. I wonder, as it relates to at least data center projects in the U.S., I mean, has there been any sort of increased scrutiny around where the money comes from for these data center projects and whether or not it's coming from outside of North America?
Yeah, it's possible that this aligned acquisition will trigger what they call a CFIUS review to look at basically whether MGX would have control over aligned. That's a normal thing to do when any international investor comes in big into a US company. But the stance from the administration seems to basically be that they're welcoming money of any kind to build data centers and AI infrastructure in the US, as long as it's green.
Right.
UAE has pledged $1.4 trillion of spending in the US over the next decade. Saudi Arabia just pledged $1 trillion itself. I don't know that we would have seen this under the Biden administration, but the Trump administration certainly is welcoming that money.
And I wonder, as it relates to these data center projects, we obviously know that the big public tech companies are involved in those efforts. We also know that the fast-growing startups, in quotes, the giants, OpenAI and Anthropic, they are certainly becoming part of the story. And look, they have their own fundraising needs, which, that's one way that companies like MGX could get involved. Could MGX also get involved in their data center projects a bit? Could the relationship at all get closer over the coming months?
Yeah, these investments that they're making in Aligned and Vantage in particular are going to draw them a lot closer to both the big tech companies and OpenAI. So Aligned works very closely with some of the largest cloud companies, think Amazon, Microsoft, Google,
Got
to
it.
build data centers for them. So that will sort of deepen the ties between the UAE and those companies. And then Vantage is actually really closely linked to OpenAI and Oracle through the Stargate project. Vantage is building at least 3 sites in Texas, Wisconsin, and Michigan for Oracle to provide OpenAI with cloud services. So, it's really kind of getting closer to these important AI companies
Hmm.
through data center investments.
Let me ask you a bit of a more broader question, your own reflections on the data center space. Look, we have all these companies. We've talked about some companies like Crusoe, for example, on the show. We haven't talked too much about Aligned and certainly about Vantage as much. You have studied these data center companies and the ways in which they're growing, some of the risks that obviously we've talked about, the debt. I haven't even really paid attention to the founders, the people who are building the company on the ground. I wonder if you have any broader reflections on the people building these businesses. I mean, or do they have sort of an affinity for these really large-scale, capital expensive businesses? Are they sort of a different type of entrepreneur? Just talk to me a little bit what you've learned about these companies.
Yeah, well, fundamentally, data centers are real estate. So I think it's important to think of these people as really real estate, investors and real estate builders. And what's sort of remarkable when you talk to them is how quickly they're having to adapt to the needs of these tech companies that suddenly want a gigawatt of power at their data centers, whereas before 100 megawatts would have been sufficient.
Hmm.
A lot of these companies are owned by private equity funds after being taken private because they weren't very attractive publicly traded companies. They had a lot of debt. Public investors couldn't quite understand them. And so what we're seeing now, I think, is these companies trying to reposition with this new growth coming from these huge AI demands to try to find a way to either go public or, like Aligned, be acquired at a really nice multiple
Hmm.
and sort of take advantage of this AI boom in the way that any sort of startup founder would. They're having to sort of go into hyper growth after being in kind of a normal growth phase, if you will,
Hmm.
for many years.
It is kind of funny to me that as we talk about debt, I mean, look, and I'm not equating this bubble with the 2008 bubble by any means, but look, that was fundamentally at some points about real estate and about mortgages. Here we have a similar group of people that are getting involved in these data center efforts. And look, we're not calling the top of the bubble. We're not saying it's going to be as catastrophic, but real estate, I mean, gosh, it's kind of what everything somehow comes back to at the end of the day.
Real estate is hard. It may be in the end that it's supply chain issues, power procurement issues that put a cap on the bubble or uh, pop the bubble, however you want to sort of view it.
Yeah,
In the end, it's real estate, and as you said, it's the debt because this
right.
stuff is all very expensive, and the funding mix is going more and more towards debt over time.
Great. Well, Miles, thanks for coming on the show. It's not a company that we have talked about a lot yet, but I anticipate we're going to have more news to come. And so we'll bring you back on when there is. That is Miles Krupa, our AI and finance reporter here at The Information. Okay. Our next segment is with our presenting partner, Amazon Web Services. Models have become a big battlefield for AI companies as they try to one-up each other with new releases every few months. Amazon has been working on its Nova model and made some new releases recently. And today, I want to look at how the company thinks about making its product suite competitive there. Joining me now is Shaun Nandy, a director at AWS. Shaun, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Akash, it's so good to see you again. I am just back from a week in Vegas and adjusting to all this cold in New York City.
Well, and it is cold. I'll tell you that, Shaun. It's certainly taking us by surprise here. I want to talk about some of the announcements that Amazon and AWS made at reInvent. I was really excited about the Nova models that the company talked about. Tell us about what's new in that family of products.
Yeah, look, let me pull back for a second. Last week was our annual conference, reInvent. We had 60,000 plus attendees. It was really amazing. I think it was the 13th reInvent. I hope I have that right. And I've been to 10 of them. So it was my 10th. I went as a customer for half of them and now as an employee. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of announcements. And that's something we're proud of. We love to innovate fast. Now, you asked about models specifically. And I'll tell you, the announcements around models came in three sort of categories in my head, at least. This is Shaun's analysis. First off, we announced the largest release of new models on Bedrock, which is our key platform. And the reason that's relevant is we had new model providers, like we had the open source models from Google, the Gemma models. We had Mistral's new family of models. We had just a broad set in different types and shapes, and we could talk about why that's actually important. Second, of course, we launched our new Nova 2 models, which you mentioned. You asked what was different. I will get to that. And third, we announced a great capability called Nova Forge around allowing customers to meld their data with our Nova models. Talk more about that. But just more specifically on what's new, we enhanced our speech-to-speech models, super exciting. We launched the first reasoning model, Nova 2 Omni, that is multimodal. So it can take all kinds of input and have all kinds of output. And that's really important forward advancement in the case of multimodal models.
Now, one of the product announcements that I was interested in is the growth in the family of custom models and the tools that AWS offers. Why are custom models such a big focus for the company?
Yeah, look, let me give a little history. I won't hopefully bore the audience too much with too much history, but it's all sort of recent, right? So in 2022 and 2023, I think a lot of customers I talked to, enterprises, of course, startups, were like, we got to build our own foundation model. Everyone's like, we got to be differentiated. We don't want to look like everyone else. And we all realized, sort of as an industry, building your own foundation model in 22, 23 took massive expertise, lots of cost. It was only viable for the largest players. That's why you saw these frontier model companies be so successful, including us, right? In 23 and 24, we heard all about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, other techniques to bring your data into models, but not really change them. And now in 25, we're seeing customers ask again, the frontier model advancement is slowing a bit. I don't mean slowing in terms of you see great stuff happening every couple months, but in terms of relevancy, if you're going a couple extra points of accuracy, does that really?
I mean, we've seen it too. Is that like the advances are starting to plateau a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be something that'll break that plateau, but for most use cases, the customer's like, has something I can do fundamentally change my business? And so they're asking again about how am I different? What gives me an advantage? And it comes back to their data, Akash, right? Like data is a company's advantage. And the companies with more data, they are in such a driver's seat for what they can do. So instead of saying what model we should use, they're starting to say, how do we unlock our data? Now, to answer your question that you started with, right? What we released at reInvent was a series of capabilities across our stack. And I'll focus on one for a second that let customers use your data more effectively. And Nova Forge and the rise of what we're calling open training models is a capability where customers can meld their data with a curated Amazon data set and effectively retrain the Nova model to be their own frontier model. That's sort of the mental model. And, we've done it so that you don't have to have a bunch of data scientists and engineers and large numbers of GPUs. Like, starts at a much lower price point. And we'll see how customers react to this. I'm bullish that it'll become quite a big thing. Now, we've also introduced capabilities in Bedrock to allow easier fine tuning. We've done a lot in space, but the net is we're making it cheaper and easier to customize. And customization, we think, is a massive competitive advantage.
Let me ask you this. If you look at the process for developing these models, we've written about this recently at the information. I mean, if you look at the phases, there's pre-training, there's evaluation, there's post-training, there's the launch, obviously. But if you look at these phases of developing models, I wonder where you think is the biggest competition right now. What is the biggest battlefield? What's the hardest thing to innovate in, and how are you seeing that?
Yeah, look, I think that we have a lot of large companies, maybe they're not large, but they're emerging companies that are really like evolving how to build the next frontier model, bringing the right research, the right capabilities, our own AGI team at AWS or Amazon included. But the thing I talked about with customization, there's more and more interest in pre-training. And I'll give you an example of like what you probably have to write about all the time, which is benchmarking.
Hmm.
And every time a new model comes out, the company announces all the benchmarks. We do too, right? Because people want some sort of quantifiable, how different is this model? I personally think one thing you're going to see change is customers are going to start to say, I don't want to see your benchmarking model provider or hyperscaler. I want to run my own benchmarking with my own use cases. And I want to see how it performs. And that's part of where things like continuous pre-training, using your own data, are becoming more relevant. And we'd like to see that pre-training be the provenance of customers themselves versus us, the hyperscaler, or versus a frontier model provider. And that's what we're trying to do with Nova Forge: put pre-training into the hands of customers, and we're going to see how that progresses. Right? I mean, we had great early feedback from Reddit. They're one of the customers who helped us work on Nova Forge as a customer. They were trying to improve content moderation and really bring in their data. And they were able to reduce a bunch of specialized ML workflows with just sort of one cohesive approach using Nova Forge. So, but it's just one example. Like we're first with it. I'm sure others will innovate in this space, and we'll see how it changes things.
Right. Last question for you. We are coming up on the end of the year in 2026. It's now time for people to start making predictions about how the narratives around AI might change, what might be the hottest topics. I wonder, as it relates to the discussion around models, this year, if we reflect, I mean, there was a lot of talk about margins. There was a lot of talk about pre-training, a lot of talk about the benchmarks. How do you think the discussion might change in 2026? What sort of predictions do you have?
So you're asking for Shaun's opinion, not AWS. I'll give you my opinion, and I'll pick a couple areas, and hopefully they're not too boring. They're interesting. First off, a couple years ago we talked a lot about model choice, and customers were like, great, but I just want to know the answer. Like, which model's best, which is cheapest, which is fastest, which is safest. I think the rise of agentic over the next year or two will bring that model choice discussion to the forefront. Customers are going to want, and they're going to use AI to help them do it, really curated model selection for their use cases. So you're going to see many more models that are like targeted individually. That's part A. Part B is this customization thing. I do believe customization is going to be a big thing because it's becoming easier. And when we talk about ROI, enterprises care about ROI, right? We've had lots of questions on why a year ago not enough stuff went from proof of concept to production. Customers didn't necessarily feel the ROI. The investment's going down. You can do custom models cheaper. You can run models cheaper. You and I talked about this a few weeks ago where I said I think the cost of inference will drop by 90%. As all these costs drop, as inference costs drop, as model customization costs radically drop, as you have more open weight models that can be had very cheaply, you're going to see organizations say, I want to tailor for me because the ROI doesn't have to be as well. The ROI will be big, the investment is not as big. So the return doesn't have to justify that personalization. And that's what is every company becomes some type of AI company. By the way, I'm not saying everyone's going to become Nvidia or us or Meta, but as AI becomes endemic in every company, it's like internet became in every company. I think that personalization layer for that company will become so important using their data. That's the future.
Great. Well, Shaun, it's great to have you on. I appreciate you making time, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to talk to you, and have great holiday season. If I don't talk to you before then, it's coming up on us.
We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Thanks, Shaun. I appreciate it. Well, that does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I want to thank Amazon Web Services, who is our presenting sponsor for this production, and I want to thank you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your viewership. I'm already excited for our next show tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye-bye for now.